Welcome to another episode of Two Depressed Men. You like that?
Might have to incorporate some comedy this time.
Dude, I don't know. And there's certainly some devastating things happening in the world. And it's not to mention it to bring in unpleasantness. It's simply to make awareness. And I know from the world that I'm living in that there's some high levels of a lack of awareness. Actually, yesterday, when I was doing a podcast with Chris, we were talking about like racism and business and actually war even. And when it comes to awareness, I had witnessed a woman in Starbucks approach a random black man. And already you're in an environment where there's a man on the other side of the counter wearing a dress with a beard, right? So it's amazing that what I'm about to say is not necessarily the weirdest thing going on, but it's just at a constant state. And the woman, who was a complete stranger to this man, wanted to pull down her mask and then tell him, by the way, sir, I wanted to let you know that earlier this week, I heard somebody use the N-word, and I told him that he can't use that. Like, do you know how offensive that is? And then the black guy's comment was like, oh, well, that's not very nice. And he didn't really have much else to say, but to me, it just goes to show that if people are going to be approaching people of color and telling them that they're not racist, I think is an absurdity, and the story speaks for itself. Anyways, it's just another one of those things that we see on a day-to-day basis. You know, you see the nonsense with the dogs, you see the nonsense with the taxes and the things people are saying on the internet, how hard it is to get by. These are a lot of things that we discuss, and I'd like to hear your take on it.
Well, the point has been made that when morality starts to fall apart and people lose touch with fundamental values, they start to place all of that worship and all of that emotional energy into things that are not important, and it's inevitable. As human beings, we have so much energy. We have so much, power. And to use that, it's going to have to go somewhere. And so if we're not oriented in the direction of service to God and living correctly and being passionate about good things, then we'll be passionate about bad things and we'll be fighting for the wrong things. So definitely matters.
Well, then to just kind of dive back into how did we end up here? All right. Now, since I was a young boy, the structure from the secular world was basically all revolved around the school system. That's what the movies show you. That's what your parents are telling you you need to be doing. Actually, earlier this week, there was a student in my boxing gym who was sitting on the floor, and he's such a great guy, but he's very quiet, and he had to drop out of the gym because he didn't have a job or money to support it. But he came back, and I asked him when he was tired on the floor after the workout, how he was, how's he doing, and what's your plan? What are you doing right now? And he said, well, I'm in school, and then, maybe I'll transfer to another school, and we'll see. And then I wanted to try and create some clarity in his mind. Like, well, is there a reason that you're going to school? He's like, well, this is what my parents are telling me to do. And I was like, well, do you have any specific fields that you have interest in? And he's like, no, not really. And then I told him, well, what are the things that you like? And he basically said he likes training at the gym and he likes playing video games. All right. So I said, well, you should be focusing on the things that you like. So I know you can only maintain gym membership here if you get a job. Are you working? He's like, yeah, I'm working on it, trying to get a job, but all my time spent in school. And again, how long's he already been in school? He's 21, 22 years old, and he still doesn't have an idea of what he wants to be doing or where he's going. And ultimately, he's going to have to survive. So by the time you get to like 24, 25, my age, you're in no way a child anymore. And you have the responsibilities of a man and also the desires of a man as well. So having all of that cooped up and having no answers or rational responses, his only thing to say was that he was lost.
Yeah, and leaving school is not going to be easy, and trying to make your way in the world is not easy at all. But that's the whole lie that you're told, that if you go to school, everything's going to be taken care of for you. It's not. And you're really avoiding the inevitable, which is that you're going to have to confront the world, and you're going to have to confront your personality, and you're going to have to figure out what you want to do and what you don't want to do. Either you're going to prolong the process until you get there, and you're going to pretend like you have a better alternative in the meantime, when you don't. The only alternative at any point in life is to wake up to your existence, to who you are, to the situation you're in, and to do your best to improve your life. And if you're going to be locked away in a school, you're escaping. It's just escapism.
Couldn't agree with you more. Well, let's put us in a position where all of these young men and women are skillless and jobless and lost, and on the road to everything, even starting as soon as middle school, revolves around like sex. They're teaching you at a time you're like, 10, 11, 12 years old. They're giving you sex ed class, like put the condom on, like really bad stuff to be encouraging and putting into kids' minds. Not to mention, it's like a co-ed prison, right? So I was like, well, if I was in co-ed prison, I'd just be trying to hit on all the girls and try and deal with that. It's not like there's any consequences to even children being born, because the prison's paying for me, and all the guards make sure that I get to sleep in my bed and nobody messes with me. They're almost serving you in a fashion.
But they make sure to say not to have children.
No, of course. Well, that's the imprisonment portion, and again, as opposed to telling them that children is a byproduct of these sort of interactions, and that's a good thing, but you need to prepare yourself and make yourself ready in order to get there. They tell you avoid it for as long as possible, so that worst case scenario, which is having a child, doesn't happen. And by the way, you can also kill the fetus, and it'll be perfectly humane and totally cool, and it won't cause any problems or issues for your life or any emotional long-term damage.
No, I mean, the reductionism of sex to just being like orgasm pleasure has actually allowed them to bring in homosexuality, transsexuality, to be like, yeah, it's just whatever, just hit it, it's all the same. Like there's no acknowledgement of what sex actually is, the act of procreation, the act of bonding between male and female, with severe consequences and real commitment that's not light at all, and that's going to require immense work and dedication throughout the rest of your life. And so if you're going to have men and women together, that needs to be done correctly, and men and women should be together. And what's funny is that for thousands of years we've had religious control over sex, right? The church controlling sex, the rabbis controlling sex in Judaism, and in Islam you got their religious leaders, and everyone's always obsessed with sex. Of course, it's the most powerful drive amongst humanity, and whoever controls sex controls the future generations. But nowadays with the secular, you have the sexual liberation that's still sexless, even though people are having so much sex and everyone's naked all over.
That's just the
not,
image.
That's not real.
Well, that's what's so sad. Jordan Peterson quoted the statistic that 50% of women under the age of 30 don't have children, and 50% of that 50% will never have a child. That's a really sad statistic, because, we're not talking about women between the ages of 30 and 40, like on the way to menopause. We're talking about the youth and the young generation, and that's going to cause irreparable emotional and mental damage until the end of their days. And again, that leaves a lot of men womanless, because there's about an even ratio of men and women. And one man taking on 10 women is not only problematic to one's financial and mental health, but at a certain point, it starts to become morally questionable and perverse, depending on how you're going about it. And so the Torah clarifies how to be dealing with extra woman if you're going to be taking care of her, and is that you're going to have to provide her food and clothing and marital relations to the best of your ability, in addition to marital status, right? And then if you were to even have a hated wife, you would still owe the wife who holds your firstborn the double portion, right? So it's trying to create as much of inequality in a really unpleasant situation. And really, you look at the history, even King David, who was a king, and he had about 17, 18 wives, he took a married woman and committed adultery, and it caused terrible outcomes for his life. And he was able to come on top, and had there been witnesses to the fact, possibly their own king could have been condemned to death, and terrible outcomes would have come into the picture. But at the end of the day, he got judgment from God, which is really the worst if you're in the wrong. And then you look at his son, Solomon, who just took on an unlimited amount of wives, like 1,000, 2,000 wives. And he ended up worshiping other gods. And I can see that happening in the relationship between men and women, because you're asking a woman to completely abandon how she grew up, and you're going to just somehow have all this conversation and put all this effort into this woman while maintaining other women as well. Like, she's going to get you with her beliefs. It takes a lot of time in order to change a woman, and she has to be extremely dedicated to you. You really can't change people who don't want to change either.
Well, it's the acceptance that these relationships are not casual and cannot be casual. And I know that's even something I struggle with myself, is like, if you don't have the ideal woman, then what do you do then? Like, what do you do in the interim? Because getting involved with a girl, assuming there are even girls to get involved with, it's a serious thing. It always is and always will be. And to me, it's just sad that there isn't more of a desire on the part of the females that I come across to want to procreate and have children, because, to Peterson's point regarding the women under 30 not having children. And so he was funny. He said, and once they're past 30, they're already a geriatric mother, which is 100% right. You're old, at that point. And the birthing meter is basically done in your mid 40s. And again, what is this immortal complex that people seem to have? Like, oh yeah, we got plenty of time. Like, you don't got time. Like, we're human beings. We have pretty limited lifespans if you think about it. And no one has a guarantee on how long they'll live. And to delay living for the sake of what? What are they delaying it for? So you can go party, so you can go get fucked, get drunk. It's stupid. It's stupid, and it's destructive, and it results in people placing all sorts of negative, demonic shit in the forefront of their mind, as opposed to listening to the wisdom of God. Choose life, right? And instead of choosing life, they're choosing death. Instead of choosing blessing, they're choosing curse. And how's that going to end up? It's not going to end up well at all. And how do you come back from that? Can you come back from that? Well, by the grace of God. But do you really want to put yourself that far down the sinkhole before you can get out, and you have to crawl out, and who knows what's left of you? The sooner that people can awaken to just the simple reality of their life and the basic weighing out what is better, what is worse. And of course, all of that information is clearly stated in the 5 books of Moses. And to me, that's something that's been blowing my mind over and over again, even though I've known it for a while now. But all of the information is in the 5 books of Moses. It's not like some of it, no, literally all of it. And actually, the downfall of all other philosophy and theology and morality comes when it deviates from that source. And so people need to be familiar with it.
They do. Well, speaking of the 5 books of Moses and where it was removed in the historical equation as of recently, it was removed and banned from the school system in the 60s. And so you're looking at like 70 years of not only a lack of awareness, but a lack of alternatives. And it's been piling and piling and piling because people's grandmas, actually something that's very interesting, a lot of the Hispanic culture, their grandmas like really maintain like hardcore justice, I suppose is maybe the best word to use, but they're the only ones who are teaching their children values and how to act and no, don't say that, don't do this. And they talk about God. But then their parents were very lax on that. And so the children that are born now, which are the teenagers and the middle-aged or the people in their 20s, have never even heard of these things. It's like basically just through their grandma. So if they just let it go, their parents have never preached it and they don't know it, their children will have no access to it. And that's really sad. And I think awareness is a good thing to talk about because presenting an alternative to people is obviously what needs to happen. But when you look at like the school system, the education is to create as docile and as single thinking people as possible. And it's heartbreaking to see the results of that because not only is people going from our middle school conversation, but into high school, where you become even less present with the things that are around you. Because sure, boys and girls will be hooking up just about any time you put them together, certainly without parental supervision. And of course, they don't have any of that at school and they can spend their own time in between that and after that, et cetera, but they have the phones. And the phones allow them to talk to one another in secret and endless hours and text multiple people at the same time and send nudes to one another. And then you download these weird apps and you're constantly like showing your face like this every 2 seconds, like, oh, hey, I'm so sexy. Like everything's around, sex and vanity. And obviously that destroys the confidence of so many young and capable men who would be able to build themselves if they weren't crushed for just being born the way that they are. And then these women are on an ego trip because essentially they have a pussy and everybody wants to fuck them. And now they make their money off of it. Like it's not even a joke. Like,
Oh, not at all.
back to the beginning of our conversation, like we're going to talk about devastating shit. Like, yeah, women are becoming prostitutes at really, really high levels and they have no shame in what they're doing.
The pornography industry, the modeling industry, it's all just exploitation of naked bodies. Women completely selling their bodies and souls to a despicable end of just money grubbing evil. It's disgusting. And to think that this is what's been happening. And it's like when you remove God from the picture and you remove faith and you remove family and you remove marriage and children, you have a vacuum that's so large. You literally have the void of hell itself. Like the negation and the lack of the cosmic Lord of all of existence is a black hole that's so large that it'll suck up everyone into that void. And that's what's happening. They've gotten rid of God. They've gotten rid of morality. They've gotten rid of family. They've gotten rid of responsibility. And so now what do you have? What? I mean, I don't even know what. Like you're pussy on a phone, like your tits in public. Like what in the world?
That's why, yeah, it actually takes place in public every day. So there's no actual escape, particularly here in Los Angeles. Like everybody who has been born in the generation has essentially had unlimited access to as much pornography as they've ever wanted to look at. And that's obviously really negatively affected the minds of so many young men and women and destroyed our purity and who knows the long-term effects on such a devastating reality. I suppose only those who stop and try to make a change will be able to experience, or even those who never stop for the next 10, 20 years, however long this goes on, will actually get to tell you what the long-term negative effects of this is. And even in the short term, like you could say, okay, 10 years, I have plenty of friends who are like, yeah, I started watching when I was 6, 7, and, my parents were never home, single family, blah, blah, blah. And like, that's heartbreaking. And it doesn't just stop there. It's trickled on into the streets where women are walking out with their tits out and they're wearing extremely small crop tops. And then they're showing not only her waist, but skirts are basically like ass level,
Ass
maybe a little
cheeks
bit,
out.
maybe a little above, you know, and um, men are going to turn and gawk at, like they always have been at the beginning of time, but that's not helpful to society. And yeah, and then again, like even if you're going to look away from that, then it's on your phone, it's in the movies, at the theaters, and that's what life revolves around. You know, like after you're done with your long workday, you sit down and you watch a show, and the sort of ideas that they're putting in there are completely scrambling everybody's brains. And also, it's pushing everybody away from the present moment. You get on your phone, you go to a movie, everybody's just in a car all day, you're just going to be on the phone. We can barely see the stars and the moon unless you go out to a place of nature here in the heart of LA. And then for people who live in nature, because of the values that have been spread all over the world, you're either a farmer or you're a drug dealer, right?
Right.
And
Yeah, and you're just following the culture of the big city, you know, the Hollywood fantasy that has gripped the minds of basically the entire earth, you know, from Asia to Africa to every, you know, if there's a blockbuster movie, it's being showed somewhere in Thailand, you know, like they've managed to create a singular culture surrounding this mindset that is quite literally just the breakdown of humanity and family and male and female and just reality, trying to blur the lines of what's real and what's unreal. And, you know, of course, it destroys people and destroys lives. And, you know,
well, it destroys the economy too, you know.
of course,
Like,
yeah, because
as
what are
if these
people
things-
buying? What are the products they're interested in? You know, something that comes to mind that I've been, this line that's just been standing out to me from the Bible is when they're building the Tower of Babel, right? And you know, it's after the flood, and they're coming together. They're all united speech, and they're all doing something. They want to build a tower, you know, and God comes down to see what they built, and He's like, you know, they're all united and they're all together, and this is what they choose to do, and this is what they begin to do, and that's such a powerful question. Right, we see as human beings all that we've been given. We've been given humanity. We've been given life. We've been given resources. We've been given knowledge. We've been given so much, and this is what we choose to do. And you just look at the choices that people make and the ways that they choose to live their lives, and you're like, how could it be? But of course, what's God's response? He goes and deteriorates their language and scatters everyone across the world and confuses them even more, because that is what they were. That's what they wanted. They wanted more confusion, so God gave it to them. You know, when we show what we really want, God says, "Okay, you can choose that, and guess what'll happen? It'll result in more confusion, more destruction, more devastation, and then we wonder how this has all happened."
Yeah, it's actually interesting that you mentioned free will. You know, a common response we hear from young women is that because it's my choice, I'm going to do the bad thing for myself because I get to choose. When you're thinking about it logically, obviously, if you wanted to show your constraint and your ability to exercise appropriate choice, you would be choosing the good thing for yourself because that's not what most people are doing. And it would be different from what everybody else is doing, not the same. And that's really how you exercise the best free will that you've been given on this earth. Like ultimately, you're bringing up the Torah. The Torah never creates a relationship between human beings and other human beings that hasn't been the same, right? And how you look at human nature, you even take Lot, right, Abraham's nephew, and how when they had been separated and he had been in Sodom and Gomorrah as a resident for something like 20 years since they split. And then the kings come in and take him, and then he goes back, and then angels are coming to pick him up in order to save him because of Abraham and his goodness and his relationship with God, that he decides to respect these guests and these strangers to the degree that he would rather throw his daughters out, his virgin daughters out into the street than give these men who, by the way, the whole scenario is that this is such a perverse state that they heard there's new strangers in town. So the men or really probably all the community members for that reason, came and knocked on his door and was like, we want to have sex with the men to break him into this community. And his response is, no, not my guest, just take my virgin daughters. And you see people's response in Lot's character quite commonly, which is like, I'm going to take the moral high ground here and do the righteous thing. It's like, no, nothing that you did was righteous. You're an evil and disgusting man. And even after the angel saved him anyways, and his daughters were able to get away and his wife turned into a pillar of salt, he decides to cower away in a cave when he had an opportunity to reestablish in a nation of other people simply due to fear. And then both of his daughters, as if they didn't know that there was more people in the world, said, you know what, we're going to sleep with our father in order to have children. And so they get him drunk and they both do the same thing. And what was the byproduct of that? Moab and Ammon were born into that. And those are the devastating nations that we are commanded to eliminate from our allegiance eternally. And they don't exist anymore, right? That's another thing, like the Jews still exist. They got God's promise. They have done good things. And so you have a question you can ask yourself: do I want to be more like Lot, or I want to be more like Abraham? Do I want to be like Noah, or do I want to be like the entire world of the generation that he grew up in? And it creates a very similar relationship to what's going on now. To all the people who are watching this, you have to tell yourself, do I want to be like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or do I want to be like everybody else?
Yeah, a crazy detail from that story with Lot that sometimes overlooked is that he was getting saved, and the angels were like, okay, we're going to take you to the mountain. And Lot said, no, I'm afraid to go to the mountain. Can you please save this city for me? And the angel says, okay, we'll save the city. And they called the city Zoar, right? And here's a city for you so you don't have to go to the mountain. Turns out he then is afraid of staying in the city. So he goes to the mountain that he didn't want to go to. And in the mountain, he's in a cave, and him and his daughters perceive this to be the entire world. And then to the extent that his daughters think the only way to continue their father's seed is through sleeping with him. Now again, they knew that there was a whole city saved for them, but they willingly chose out of fear and avoidance to put themselves in a cave where that was the conclusion that they came to. The only reasonable thing to do would be to have sex with their father. And it's so telling about the real nature of human beings, and so perverse. And that's what's so fascinating about the Torah, is that it's on point about how people actually are and how reality actually is. And that's something that people don't want to see. And that's why they all get so turned off by the Bible. Like, oh, it's a little much there. It's like, how about you go look at what really takes place in the world and the evil that is perpetrated?
People are seeing it all the time, like people are watching tranny porn. You know, like, well, you're going to tell me
no, this shit exists.
People are cutting, like, go ahead and type in transgender surgeries,
or don't.
That would be the truth. But if you really want to know what's going on around you, this is not casual at all.
Not at all. And if we don't have an awareness of these things that comes from God and how he wants us to view it, then we're screwed. Because what frame of reference do we have to even deal with all of this insanity? And then when you come across it, and God is not the one who's telling you how to view it and how to behave in the face of it, you're powerless, because the force of evil is strong. If sin is crouching at the door and its desire is towards you, yet you shall rule over it. But you can only rule over it because God gave you the ability to rule over it. And you can only rule over it because God has given us the guidance principles on how to behave and how not to behave. And if we don't become aware of just how dangerous these things are when we're not properly equipped to deal with them, then you're looking at the destruction of the soul taking place, and the body and the spirit and everything starts to fall apart.
To add to your point, simply because you were talking about the awareness, the following is to educate yourself as well, because if you don't educate yourself, you won't know the laws. And that's what's so beautiful about the 5 books of Moses, is that even though the first story is telling you about men in a historical narrative and you can derive information from it, there's still very few tactical things that were established as laws. Like if you want to be more like Abraham, then you want to be part of the covenant of God, then you be part of circumcision. Don't have blood, don't eat the fat. You're looking at be fruitful and multiply as being the first commandment, and then it's essentially done with commandments until the next 4 books. And the next 4 books It doesn't say don't murder necessarily. It's just that states a fact. Like if you kill your fellow, then there will be people who want to kill you, and their blood is on your hands. And again, it just confirms so much about reality that's already there, but it's confirmation, and you can derive information from it. The next 4 books simply give you codes of how to live correctly, like how to deal with women, how to deal with law, how to deal with proper business, how to deal with your land, how to deal with war, how to deal with rape, how to deal with murder, how to deal with stealing. And it's not only telling you don't and do what is immoral, what isn't immoral. There is things that are frowned upon, and then there are things that you bear consequences for, and that a judgment will come from not only God at the highest form, but it'll also come from man, and God gives man that ability to judge their fellow righteously. Now, if we just use the platform that God gave us to do whatever we want, whether you use the face of religion or you use your own ego to
It's all
implement
subject
that,
to corruption.
it's all subject to corruption, correct?
Yeah. And, that's evident in the Torah, and that's why judges are cautioned to be men of truth who hate greed and don't accept bribes. In fact, that's even a characteristic that's attributed to God in Deuteronomy. It says, God does not lift up someone else's face. He doesn't favor people for no reason, and he doesn't accept bribery. Right? And that's the whole point, is that in a truly divine structure, we don't have ulterior motives that come from bad places. We have to be pure
Or
in our
even
judgment.
if we did, the response should still be the same, whether it's fear of the men implementing the justice that God allows us to, or, of course, having fear of God.
Yeah, and that's the only salvation in that scenario, and that's why you need to have proper fear of God in order to not be influenced by whatever exterior biases you have or things that are influencing you, or just straight bribery. Like, think about how we were watching that movie Casino, where it's like, oh, if you pay the right guy enough money, you get him buried in the desert tomorrow. Yeah. So the rich people don't get convicted. Look at the Torah. Do not glorify the face of the rich. Do not have extra compassion on the poor if they don't deserve it. And that's the whole point. You have to have a standard of justice that works across cultures, across nations, across genders, across everything, so that there is actually a way to judge with righteousness that's not dependent on people's own faulty judgment.
It's amazing, too, that all of mankind has gained access to that information. When initially speaking, really only the Jews had it, because from the time of Moses to Joshua, writing it down on stones and on coats of plaster and scrolls, and then just handing it down from family generation to family generation and continuing to upkeep that. But then by the time of 1500 years after the giving of the Torah, you look at Christ coming into the picture and people still not having access to the printing press, which almost comes like 1,000 years later after that, which is insane, by the way. So the Christians themselves were writing so much of their own dogma, as were the Jews, and the Torah got lost in all of that, when both Jews and Christians, if they believe in God, should be able to implement the Old Testament, which is what gives us the right way to live, and how certain Christians and Christians in history have lived, and how Jews have lived over the course of history, but mostly they haven't, right? And that comes from the fact that they disregarded that literature, and they're foundationless, listening to the words of men and their own self-references.
Yeah, and no coincidence that the Bible is the most common book on the planet. Anywhere you go in the world, there's the Bible in your motel room, in your grandma's belongings.
Holding up your grandma's bed.
It's somewhere. It's around, and it's so readily available. And that in and of itself is miraculous, that anywhere you go, you can just pick up the Bible and read these words. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And people are, they want to dispute that just for the sake of being, counterintuitive and wanting to be combative against reality itself. And, combat God. See how that works out. not well. And, at some point, there needs to be humility that happens and a recognition that all of history, there is a way to process it. There is a frame that actually reveals God talking to man and telling us how to live, and then us falling short from that standard repeatedly for thousands of years. And when you see that, things start to make sense. It's not like we've been wandering apes with no awareness whatsoever and no connection to the divine and no understanding of God and what he wants from us. No, we do. We're humans. We know. And we've had this information, and it's now been disseminated across the whole world. And this is what we do. We still continue to do this. At some point, the accountability has to kick in to recognize that we need to step up and that we have the choice and the ability to do so.
Well, if everybody has been affected by these things, you need to acknowledge that you have been messed up by the systems and you've been screwed over by the false teachings and practices. Like if you've gone through all of high school and middle school and even college, and then you come out and you realize that I'm jobless, I have no skill set. What am I supposed to be doing with my time? Like just even on that base level, you're going to be very, very hurt. And so in order to heal from that position, you have to be really humble and you have to basically say, look, I made a really bad decision, whether it was other people who implemented it on me or it was my own free will. I am now at this level and somebody needs to, there's going to be plenty of people that should be able to accept you, like take all these women who've not only been whores over the course of that, but they end up in the same damn spot. And so like, well, you two have done the same things and you guys have injured yourself and the world and other people, and it's time to make amends and move forward.
I mean,
get together. You're going to have to get together and say that this is what I'm going to get in this life. It takes a lot of humility to do so, but it's the only path forward, because are all these people, right? These childless 30-year-olds and these 30 to 40-year-old women and these, porn addicted, drug addicted men in their mom's basement, not going to ever wake up from these things? Is that the sort of world that we're going to continue living in? I certainly hope not. May God heal us all and bring us salvation.
Amen. And there has to be a hopeful message, one of understanding and acknowledgement of why people would be so lost. And unfortunately, so many are victims of things that are seemingly out of their control. And, that's why the moment you wake up, that's where you are. That's where you're at. And it's been said that acceptance is the beginning of change, right? Whereas like you first need to accept that this is who you are and this is where you're at. And then you can start to change and improve yourself and know that that's a journey that does exist. Abraham's not called to go until he's 75. Go, leave your father's house. Well, that's when he went. There's age is a number and everything's possible with God. And that's why it's important to not be discouraged, even if you find that it's been so long that you're disconnected from the things that are good for you. People are victims. People are victims of all sorts of terrible abuse and horrible crimes. And God knows. God understands. You better believe that God's judgment is righteous and that he knows you and he cares about you and he created you in his image. I mean, if that's not the indication that we are significant, I don't know what is. To be created in the image of God means that we are not small, meaningless beings. We are significant, powerful beings with purpose and care from on high, from the highest place, from the highest one, from the greatest God. And he calls on each and every one of us to go on that journey, to heed the calling, and to return to him with all of our heart and all of our soul, and to become realized individuals, not just to wait for someone else to do it for us.
Most definitely. Just to reconfirm and finish out because I got to get going. You very brilliantly expressed that without God, for us to be living not only makes life purposeless, but it essentially mimics the insect kingdom, except we're not even as well functioning as they are. And if God is part of the picture, then there is purpose to all of this, and that there will be an end, and it will be glorious because it's God who's writing the picture, even though we like to feel like we make up so much of what goes on. Anyways, God bless you.
I bless you as well.
Thank you.